Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I'm your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Erika Andresen. Erika is the founder and CEO of EAAS, Erika as a Service. Erika is a veteran, best-selling author, and business resilience expert. With a decade of experience in disaster management and a background as a U.S. Army JAG Corps major, Erika has advised generals and NATO on critical operations. She now channels her expertise to help businesses navigate risk. Erika teaches emergency management for UTEP and advanced business resilience at MIT, bringing practical insights for her diverse career. Her innovative EAAS, Erika as a Service, offers unparalleled guidance for businesses aiming to serve and thrive in unpredicted world. You can find Erika on LinkedIn by searching Erika Andresen or by going to her website, eaasc.com, or by email at info@esc.com. Hello, Erika. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick correction, that email is info@eaasc.com.
Thank you. So to start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Erika Andresen?
Well, I am a fairly abstract person. So I was actually thinking about this last week, not this question. I was just thinking about success. I think success is where you are able to have moments of gratitude and appreciation for where you are. And the ability to do that, you're successful no matter what, because you can determine whether or not a failure is going to lead you in a pit of despair and ashes, or it's going to be a phoenix moment where you can rise. So last week, I figured out, because I was just going over my business for the year, that there was about, just be specific, if $59,450 of business that I was supposed to get that suddenly disappeared. And it wasn't that I lost it to somebody else. It's the people decided to just not engage in business continuity for various reasons. And I didn't see that as a failure. I mean, I'm disappointed, but I was like, well, look at that. I lost $60,000 of business, but a year ago, I wouldn't be anywhere close to losing $60,000 of business. So being able to look backwards and chart my progress and take a moment to say, you know what, that was a good thing. Even though I'm disappointed in the outcome, I've still come so far. And that to me is a success.
And I think that's so important to take a step back sometimes and go in those moments where it's like you might be looking at your books and going, oh my God, why didn't I get this business? Now I'm, 60K less this year. And, we all have goals as entrepreneurs as well of what we'd like to be monthly and annually. And so sometimes we take that and it becomes a stressor. Okay, what can I do last minute to get this business back? Or what am I going to do now that I didn't have it? But sometimes, like you said, and it hit the nail on the head with it, is look at where you were a year ago. Was that even an option, right? Especially if you're starting out, we get so pressurized, or at least I have felt this way previously, of like, okay, I got to keep making that. I got to keep meeting these goals. And when it doesn't happen, you go down this rabbit hole, or even in the month, if trajectory wise, it doesn't look like it's happening, you're going, okay, now I just feel underwater. Now I got to keep pushing. Now I got to just squeeze somewhere else. And what ends up happening is if you go by that approach, you might potentially be squeezing a client to make a decision that then turns around and they're like, okay, well, we're just not going to use you because that's the easier solution.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, if I took a step back, go, okay, maybe they'll circle back. Let me keep lines of communication open. You don't know in next year's budget or where they might be in 6 months. Now I haven't cut ties, but when someone makes a sharp decision, it could go against you. So sometimes it's taking that step back, asking yourself those questions and really go, look at all that I've accomplished so far.
Right. Because it's not even about like, did I fail? It is, I had an opportunity. I wouldn't have had, and not everybody else gets that opportunity. Honestly, even so like last year, but even 2 years ago, because I'm about to hit my third year of business, there's no way I would be even close to saying I lost $60,000. It was two potential clients, and that was it. Like the fact I even had a seat at the table to talk to them and present to them and got as far as I did, that's huge. So I don't see that as a failure. That's a success. It didn't turn into a monetary success yet, but it prepared me for the next one.
And I love how you say that because it is also asking yourself as you grow, especially, and this has been conversations I've personally had with individuals, even on my own business and that transparency lately of it isn't about how many clients you have, is it the right fit and the right people? So when you look at, okay, you know, I didn't sign that client. Well, were they truly the right fit? And is it preparing you to have that conversation, right? We look at the aspect of mock interviews. Those mock interviews prepare you for when you do step into the interview that brings you to the right job to prepare you the best way possible for that conversation. That is, in essence, what you're doing with the two clients you lost. What we do sometimes when we lose a client, it isn't losing them because there's something else better, different down the line that leaves you space for, but it also prepares you, like you said, for those conversations as well. And your whole background is making sure we're all prepared, right?
Sure
So,
is.
I mean, readiness and preparedness goals, because it isn't always about being in the room, it's about being in the right room, like
Mhm.
you mentioned. And when we really ask ourselves, like, yes, I didn't get this client. And I recently had this thought of like, okay, I didn't get that client, but realistically, based on the conversation, would it have been smooth working with each other, or would have there have been bumps and traction between what the client was expecting versus what I was able to deliver, or me delivering on my end, but the client expecting more? Like, would there have been that traction and bumping heads where it wouldn't have been the best for us to work together? And so sometimes it's that as well. But Erica, I want to take it back a few years. As I just said, you're all about readiness and preparedness, and really what you echo through everything that you do now, even our conversation prior to this a little bit, and we will touch upon that. But Erica, you started your career as a corporate attorney, and
Mhm.
then you made a remarkable shift and made the decision to join the US Army JAG Corps.
Mhm.
Can you share what drove you to make, to many, such a bold decision, and how that experience shaped your own path, as well as the approach to disaster management and business resilience?
So it was basically a moment of doing something good with my law degree. At the time, doing corporate law in New York City, it was the early to mid aughts, and I was not really fulfilled for a lot of reasons, helping really rich banks and corporations stay rich. Because at the end of the day, that's what I did. And I started doing pro bono work for veterans, and I was like, wow, this actually feels like something good. And I wanted to do more like that, but it just felt dirty to charge. And while I was having this moment of thinking about what am I doing with my law degree, 2008 was going on and the world economy collapsed. And I was helping defend these banks that caused the economy to collapse from SEC and DOJ investigations. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do more of what makes me feel good. So I had a friend who knew some JAG Corps recruiters, and I was like, can you set me up with some of them? And he's like, sure. And then, within 2 years, I was doing the active duty military thing because I felt like I would say money didn't matter to me for, by and large. I was like, oh, you make all this money, it's going to mean something to you. You're not going to be able to leave. I was like, it's not that important. To me, it was more about feeling good every day that I woke up and enjoyed doing what I did. And that just wasn't the case anymore with corporate law. And I'm not entirely sure it was ever the case with corporate law. I mean, the money was nice, but things changed. And then when I was in the military, one of the things I got to do as an extra duty was be an emergency operations center legal advisor. And that got me on the step and the path to doing emergency management, which then led me to doing continuity stuff. Because every day in the military, they do continuity of operations, which is the military version of business continuity and resilience. And it's funny, I still get to use my law degree, at least my legal thinking, when I help my current clients, because I advertise myself as a recovering lawyer, but that legal brain is still there. So I see things and I can ask questions of my clients because I used to direct investigations. So there could be giant holes of information. I don't need to know everything. I know how to ask questions to fill them in and get a complete picture. So this is how I start doing some kind of assessment with my clients. And it was through this one disaster, the first disaster I was actually promised that my EOC legal advisor job, they're like, that's going to be one meeting a quarter for 2 hours. Well, that wasn't true because we wound up having an actual natural disaster happen within 2 weeks of me getting that duty. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. And I really liked what I did. I'm going to go back a little bit further too, because one of the things I learned, and not every lawyer learned this, and it's a sad thing that not every lawyer learned this. When I was doing an externship in law school, one of my mentors who was leading my externship, he was the general counsel of the New York City Department of Small Business Services. He's giving me my review and he's like, Erika, you're really good at saying no. And I was like, thanks, because I thought that's what lawyers did. You find the rule and you say, nope, you don't meet this. And he's like, but here's the thing, Erika, no doesn't allow anything to happen. No doesn't create anything. No doesn't cause any solutions. You have to figure out a way to get to yes. Legally, of course, you have to get to yes. And that for me was such a pivotal piece of advice. So one of the things I did with the EOC was, what can the military actually do to assist the civilians outside of our base with disaster response? And there's a lot of authorities that say no. And I was like, okay, let me figure out a legal way to do this, or an alternative way to do this, or an alternative source we're not thinking about, so we can at least tell everybody else what to do. And I was like, I really like this. I want to do more like this. And if I ever got out of the military, what kind of degree could I get to enhance this? And I decided getting an MPA, which is like the government nonprofit version of an MBA, would be it. So I wound up doing that.
For you as well, and I'm going to touch upon something you mentioned, signing up for a job and going, okay, I'm going to take this role within the US Army JAG, and that being emergency relief. And then 2 weeks into starting, when they're like, oh, it's just going to be a meeting, a natural disaster hits. What did you learn in that experience, especially being green? You hadn't seen that. That wasn't the expectations told to you either. Um, what was it like going through that? And what did you learn through that first experience that shaped other approaches that you had down the road doing emergency relief as well?
So the disaster happened, and my boss, who's a colonel, came to me and he said, hey, the general's having a meeting about this. Since you're the EOC person, you have to go. He's going to ask you what to do. Here's a book on domestic operations. Flip through it. If you have any questions, ask me or ask Major, or I can't remember the other Major's name at this point. I was like, okay, thanks. So I had 2 hours to flip through a book and get some basic understanding. But the thing is, they didn't just necessarily throw me to the wolves. They understood that of the other JAGs, normally JAGs go straight from JAG college to JAG school, or law school to JAG school, and then into the JAG Corps. But I had practiced for almost 7 years first. So they trusted that I knew how to figure stuff out. So I had both trust and support from people who actually had experience doing this kind of thing. And they didn't want to step in and be like, we got this, don't worry about, you know what you're doing, because we want the glory spot. It was like, this is your job. We have faith that you can handle this and figure it out. And you're not going to fail because we won't let you. Don't worry about it. And also we have faith in you. And that's how I showed up to that first meeting. And I was like, okay, I learned some really important things at first. And then I got super nuanced as the disaster went on. And then every duty station I had after that, I became a subject matter expert because almost every single job I had after that one was dealing with natural disasters, be it a wildland fire, be it a pandemic. And then when I was in Afghanistan, that was also a different risk matrix that I was responding to there. So, and I forgot the second part of your question. I said I was going to write these down. Oh no.
No, you're good. That was a great answer. And I think it demonstrates too that you might go into a situation and go, okay, I'm very new at this. How am I going to handle it? But being provided the confidence as well as like we know you can handle it, we trust you, and having that aspect from a team leader can make all the difference in going, okay, not only do we trust you, not only do we support your decisions, but come to us and ask questions. Do
Yep.
not be scared to need support, can make all the difference when you're going into something new. And I think that's a perfect example of going, okay, as a leader, right? And you can correct me if I'm wrong here. When you start at the top and go, okay, I know I can ask questions, I can ask it to the commander and up the chain, and people see that. And then you're going into a disaster area where some people are scared to ask for help. They don't know how to ask for help.
Mhm.
But seeing that you're comfortable with going, I don't know everything, but I will find the answer, makes it a lot easier for other people to feel comfortable, but know that they're not in that situation alone.
Yeah, that's the next place I went to. I did a lot of, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think people innately want to help. And they're like, oh, you don't know? Yeah, they like the honesty first and foremost. And then also, I had an eagerness to want to learn. I actually wanted to do better, which is why it wasn't like, I don't know what I'm doing. Don't give this to me. It was, hey, I don't know what I'm doing and I want to know. Please help guide me. I would always seek out, not even in non-traditional ways, not just strictly through the JAG lines. I would go to other commanders in other areas and I'm like, hey, when you do this, what do you do? Like, I just want to understand a more robust, way to handle this. And that's always kind of been the way I learned. And I want to learn is be very honest that I don't know something, but also have such a curious mind. I want to know, and I just want to be better. And I think when we do that together, the whole community evolves when everybody's comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know either. Let's do this together. Or, hey, I don't know, but I've heard this. Cool. I've heard that. So let's see if these things work together. So it's a real collaborative effort that winds up helping it. And that's how I wind up helping business owners now. It is a collaboration effort. It's not people say, I need a business continuity plan, and then I do it for them. I have to work with them. They have to work with me.
And I love that you bring that up because it was where I was going to transition next. So it's kind of like you read my mind there. But, one thing you brought up previously as well is you still get to put your lawyer hat on sometimes because it is about knowing what questions to ask to paint that full picture and really being able to work with your client, like you mentioned, to build the solution because there isn't a blueprint that one size fits all in any means. So for you, how does the transition into working with businesses after leaving the US Army, what was that initial experience like for you?
So I alluded to it somewhat earlier, very tacitly, where I said, we call it continuity of operations in the military. I had to, there were certain things I had to learn about going from military to civilian. And one of them is the language and the vocabulary. So I didn't know that what I did was business continuity. I knew it was continuity of operations. And there are very different meanings for the same term. So when somebody asked me, what's your disaster recovery experience? I was like, oh, we recovered from this natural disaster, blah, blah. But in business continuity, that's a very specific term of art that is about data being saved. So I sounded like I didn't know what I was talking about, which isn't true. I just didn't know that the language was different and they had different terms and very specific definitions for what they mean. And I was like, oh, I know this. I didn't know that I knew that though. And it was only through getting the certification to become a certified business continuity professional. They have a specific class for veterans only that is taught by a veteran who says, hey, you know how you know this? We're like, yeah. He's like, okay, apply to civilian businesses. This is what this is. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, of course, we already know this. We already have a lot of experience with this. So that was the first thing in transitioning from military to corporate. The other is optimism bias. And in the military, we have one mission. It's to win wars and not die. And if any part of the cogs that make that mission happen falls out, that's unacceptable because that risks mission failure. So we're always thinking about how big the impact is and how negative it can be if we don't do our job right. Optimism bias is a psychological thing where people will say, like, hey, there's a 60% chance of this happening. People are risk adverse and they actually think, oh, I'm in that 40%, but 100% of the people think they're in that 40%. So that's a mathematical impossibility. They think it's not going to happen to me. If it does happen, it's not going to be that bad. If it does happen, the government will come in and save me. And none of those things are true, to be perfectly honest, because the government is very limited in what they can do. And oftentimes people don't even think about this. The government is also, it's not like they live in a box that's not impacted by the same disaster. So a lot of the times the responders that you're hoping will show up are people just like you. So your first responders wind up being you and your neighbors first until the real first responders can get to you.
And that's totally true on a few different aspects that I will touch upon now. When you talk about transitioning into civilian life and terms meaning the same, or, you know, those terminologies where it's a little bit different, I experienced that on the opposite end, right? Working in a corporation where there were a lot of veterans that were government oriented, I was going from no terminology to speak to three different people and the same word means three totally different things. And now you got to keep track of what they mean to different people. But also seeing that on a personal end, as my boyfriend does serve, he's a chief in the U.S. Coast Guard, and there'll be times he says things to me or abbreviates things. And working in business, it means one thing, and I have to put my hat on and go, "Oh, what are you telling me right now?" Or what does that stand for? Because in my head, I know it just doesn't align by this conversation we're having of like, "Oh, this person is this rank," and I'm like, why is every rank like their abbreviations are so close? Like, how am I going to remember that? Whereas, like, if you tell me they're that the chef on the boat versus, the head engineer, it's going to be a lot easier for me to remember. So things like that. But also, right before we start recording, we were talking about the natural disaster that happened in Juneau, Alaska, where I currently live. And it thankfully I was not personally affected, meaning my home was not flooded out like so many individuals in Juneau had happened because of where my house was. However, you hit the nail on the head in speaking about that the first responders are really your neighbors, because not only were the first responders to respond to the Mendenhall Glacier flooding, which was the highest flood ever that had happened in Juneau. It was at 15 feet. So, like, I'm 5 feet. That's about three of me, right? And really hitting people's homes. Those first responders were the Coast Guard who were stationed here. Those people were, the neighbors, like you said, that came from other parts of Juneau and said, okay, how can we step in? Can we help you pull the carpeting out of your house? Like, after we've already made sure that after the flood happened, everyone's safe, and making sure there was a plan in place as this happened on a Tuesday, as Monday progressed. The animal shelter stepped in and said, anyone who has dogs, we will hold them, because it was far enough out of the zone where they knew the animals would be safe. And if someone had to escape, the animals wouldn't be left behind. people coming in and saying, okay, mandatory evacuations. But that day, there were even Coast Guard houses that got highly damaged. And there were not only were those families affected from it firsthand, where they didn't really have a place to sleep and worrying about themselves. They're the ones showing up to make sure you're okay.
Mhm.
And when you watch the community come together and go, okay, how can we help each other out? You know, the National Guard isn't here yet to help with the relief. So what can we all do to make sure everyone's eating, everyone, has clothes, and really step in to make sure everything is provided until those responders get there.
Right. And so how do I get business owners to see that? I mean, you see it firsthand because you actually experienced it. And the strongest way people retain information is through experiential learning. They retain about 80 to 90% of what they experienced 10 days after versus like 5 to 10% after reading something 10 days after they've read it. So I was doing a lot of lecturing on and webinars on business continuity to let business, because I concentrate in the small business space. And small businesses, by and large, do not know what business continuity is, and there's no reason for that, other than people aren't spending the time because giant corporations have been doing this for decades. Franchise have been doing this for decades. And there's, small businesses need this. So I would, instead of talking about return of investment, I would talk about COI, which most people assume is center of influence. And I go, no, I call it the cost of inaction. So let me tell you how much pain you're going to be in. And they go, okay, that's interesting. But what really is the risk? Again, hitting up against optimism bias. And I went, you know what? Let me do an exercise with you. And you're not supposed to do an exercise when they don't actually have a plan, but I've figured out a way to do it. And I'm like, I'm going to create a fake business for you. You're a business owner. You can understand this. Now you have a location here that's about to hit by a hurricane in 2 days. You have a warehouse with this many employees. What are you going to do now in 2 days of preparation of this hurricane? And then to watch them like struggle to figure out what they're going to do and come up with some really good ideas. It's like I actually see the hamster wheel turning in their head. And then one guy goes, wait, can we start over? Can I just like not have my business be located there? And I went, you are exactly right. Because people ask me, when is the best time to do business continuity? And I say, when you're starting a business, when you're doing a business plan, do it. And I was like, oh, I need to figure this out first. I'm like, no, you don't. Because here's the thing. If you don't want to have to deal with hurricanes, you're going to figure that out in advance. Oh, I don't want to do that. Let me not locate my business there then. It's easier to figure that out before you move everything and invest in the warehouse on a hurricane-prone beachfront versus afterwards. But afterwards, you kind of have to deal with it. But that there's, it's never too late to learn what you wish you knew earlier, to include having a business continuity plan, because you'll just be better prepared for next time. And one of the guys who is attending this game thing that I did for an exercise, he goes, I'm a cybersecurity specialist, and I know my systems are coming up eventually. I never thought about all the other aspects, like the people who work there who may be impacted by a hurricane because they have an elderly person at home they have to evacuate with. I never thought about all these things. And I feel like I've been doing my clients a disservice by not thinking about this stuff and telling them about it. And I was like, this for me was huge because I actually saw them get it because I made them go through the paces.
And it's so important too. And I think one thing you really highlighted there is it's good to start thinking about these decisions when you're starting a business. So many entrepreneurs in so many different aspects of business strategy go, I don't need to think about this aspect until later down the road, until it starts to happen, until, all these things. I need to do XYZ. But if you don't look at that big picture from the start, like you said, well, then you either have to pivot or you have to sit in it and be like, okay, now I'm going to have to deal with this. And it reminded me of one decision when I started my business that a lot of people ask me about now, right? When I started my business 2 years ago, I was not dating someone who would have to move every 2 to 4 years. That wasn't even a thought in my mind. But I was like, business growth and my own life and what has come up in the past 4 years. I travel a lot. Okay, for different things, whether it's work or personal, I'm traveling. The people I want to help, are they just in Jersey at the time, or is it wider range? And how can I get the service to them? And I made the conscious decision then to go, a brick and mortar would be more harm to me and more bills in the short term and long term than if I was completely remote. I'm providing the same service, but now I don't have nearly the same amount of overhead. Gives
Mhm.
me funds to allocate other places. It gives me more ability to help people. And if I was somewhere else, whether it's due to travel, whatever it might be, I now can still operate my business. And I made that thought process and conscious decision. Fast forward 2 years, and I've had to relocate somewhere where podcasting and podcast consulting is not really a thought. There's a lot more trades that happen. The client base isn't nearly the same. However, my clients are all over, so it doesn't matter. I'm fully remote, so it doesn't matter. But if I didn't make that conscious decision 2 years ago, then when it came time to go, okay, I do have to relocate, now you have to change the whole business strategy. So that really ignites within me because I always emphasize the importance of really covering all aspects of your strategy plan and understanding the different aspects early on because you don't need to be the expert, but you have to be able to at least understand what to take into uh, what to actually absorb, who to turn to, and what are the initial plans in place. You and I joked about this. You're big about planning. I'm a big planner. I want to know, if plan A doesn't work out, what is our plan B and C?
Mhm.
Because lots of times plan A is not going to work out. So we need to be able to pivot. And if you don't have those plans in place, or at least the outlines of plans,
Yeah.
then while you're processing, like you said, a natural disaster, you're having to in real time go through all those emotions, but also trying to make sound business decisions as well, which does not always collide.
No, no. And I think also for your listeners, it's not just about disasters. Most people assume business continuity deals with disasters, but it's also disruptions like, let's say, a key piece of machinery stops working, or the entire warehouse staff wins Powerball and quits the next day. Like all the things you have to think about. And, a lot of the stuff doesn't happen on your schedule or even growing into viral overnight success. And like I said, sometimes you just have to have a rough sketch. So if, and a lot of the stuff you don't need to pay someone to do this for. You need someone you pay somebody to say, hey, have you thought about this? But if you're thinking about like, I might want to go viral, I might want to have a product that's going to explode. Like people used to do this with Home Shopping Network. They would prepare in advance of going on the Home Shopping Network and having a lot of products already pre-made to handle the demand. So when people are going viral now and they've not spent, all it requires is time and effort of thinking about how am I going to ramp up production very quickly if I need to. You don't have to do the actual ramping up. You just have to plan out what that would look like, who your extra vendors would be, how to get extra staff on to help you. Figure that out in advance. So when it does happen, you're like, ah, I got a plan for that. Let's enact it.
That being said, what would be your advice if someone is in the early years of their business or just starting their business of, hey, have you thought of these things to get the conversation going on, what their plan is? Like this is where you need to start. These are the questions you should ask yourself. Um, and what should that look like?
So I think part of it is where do you want to go? But so early on, you get the practice in. That's why I say if you start early, you get the practice in. It's familiar. You just keep updating it because even if you are a business that's been around for 10 years, you still have to keep updating your business continuity plan almost annually because of things that change. Shift in market could be one thing. You might increase in size or decrease in size. These are all things that will impact how you respond to things. Maybe there's a giant sewer project going on in your municipality, so your evacuation route is no longer an option for you. There's a lot of things you need to consider. But from the very early stages, I had somebody say to me, oh, I can't do business continuity till I grow. And I was like, all right, hold up. I'm going to ask you some questions. And then through just 5 minutes of quick asking questions, they were like, oh my God, I have a lot of work to do. And it wasn't so that they could grow. It was just even as they can maintain from the very beginning what they were going to have to do. And they're like, I didn't think that I could do business continuity until I grew, but I realized I can't grow without business continuity. And I was like, thank you for giving me proof of concept, because that's really what it's about. It's knowing that you're growing from a secure space. And if you have to pivot, the pivoting, and that's the other thing too, like recognize as you start out, you're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to make changes. It could be a client pivot. It could be an actual business structure pivot. It could be a goal pivot. But if you're caught on your back of your heels and having to do it quickly in the moment, you're going to be sloppy about it. And you're going to increase a lot of vulnerabilities in your business that's going to wind up eventually causing you to fail or suspend operations if you haven't figured that out in advance. If you have the ability to do it early and do it safely, you can also go, okay, now let me go back and see if we did everything right. Make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed now that I have a moment to breathe. And this is something that when I was teaching this semester for emergency management, my students who are graduate students, one of them was talking about September 11th and the response that NYU had, because it was a mile up from the site. And he's like, why are they concerned about what if there's an attack next week? They should be concerned about what's going on right then. And I go, okay, let's talk about the psychology of this. Why do you think in World War II they dropped 2 bombs in close succession? Because people who want to harm you, it causes more harm when you are on your knees, just hit, and you haven't had time to recover, because not only is it a physical harm, it is soul crushing to get hit again. And I'm like, and this is what people aren't thinking about. They go, okay, well, this just happened. Nothing else could go wrong. I can't handle anything else going wrong. It's like, yes, you can. If you think about it and you prepare for it, you can handle almost anything, or put yourself in a better position to handle than you would have without. I'm not saying, I never guarantee 100% success. I just say that you're having a better chance at survival otherwise.
It's important too to understand needing to pivot. Needing to pivot doesn't mean that you've not succeeded in a previous goal or your offering wasn't right. It just means your offering, and we'll take a service, for example, was not what that person or your mass customers were looking for. They saw you excel in another area and now they want to touch upon that. And so it doesn't mean you totally failed. It just means look at the new opportunity you have to create something else. And I'll use my own self example is when I started my business, the consulting side was all career development and personal development. And that's what I planned for and strategically laid out. But I said to myself, if I start hearing different feedback, then I might have to pivot, whether that is like what the offering consists of or where people are organically leaning towards, whether that's a resume versus LinkedIn help, right? Well, with the success of the podcast, not even by clients coming to me in networking groups, the conversation was no longer about my career development help. It was how can I help them and what was my knowledge and experience like in the podcasting space. And I took a moment then and I was 2 months, 3 months into my business being the only business I had. I wasn't working for Lockheed Martin at the time anymore. And I was like, here's the writing on the wall. So let me take the time to strategically plan this out and start offering it and see how it does. And it skyrocketed. It wasn't that career development help wasn't necessary because I still get those clients, but there was a different want that I was hearing based on the conversations I was having and the clients. And sometimes individuals are so fearful of that pivot because then it will make it seem like they were unsuccessful in an area, that they become strapped and prisonered within what they're doing. And I think that is a barrier we all have to push upon, is like not everything is a failure because you have to pivot.
Right. And I want to hit on something quickly. You said you had the opportunity to create, and one of the most famous business continuity plans comes out of Waffle House. They created in 1988. And to the point that FEMA even looks at Waffle House to see what menu they're serving to know how bad things are. So the heads at Waffle House said, okay, if there's a hurricane, we're going to lose power to do this stuff. So all our perishable food items, we can't serve them. So I was like, wait, can we make a menu with just non-perishable items? And we can. So let's do that. So that's their yellow menu. Corporately speaking, that's their yellow menu. So they can still be open when refrigeration is out. They can still be serving food and making money. And then if they have a red menu, it means there's nothing they can do. So when Waffle House closes, they know, oh no, we're in trouble. So, but they've taken that's true leadership, saying, wait, just because we can't do this, is there another thing that we can do and still be open and serve our clients and customers? Because that's one of the things that I always like to talk about with how important both emergency management and business continuity is for communities is open businesses, no matter what your size, helps communities heal. So, from moving around, because I know from moving around a lot, you don't want to cook dinner when your household goods shows up. You want to be able to go out and get food. And if there's no restaurant, you're screwed. You're like, oh, I don't have this lack of stress. Like, I have to cook now. It just adds to your stress. But being able to go out, get a cup of coffee, buy a newspaper. I mean, I'm definitely aging myself by saying that. But, even getting a meal, you need businesses to be open to provide those things for you. And that's there. I don't think businesses realize how important they are to community identity and healing.
And I was laughing, and I want to explain why. If people were watching this or heard it, when you mentioned the household goods, because it is so true for anyone who's moved and something gets delayed if they hired a moving company or moving out of state, right? For people who serve, household goods arriving the day they arrive to their house does not happen. Like it's not a thing. And a lot of times, depending on where you live, it could take a week, 2 weeks. It also depends on how soon after you've arrived to your new state that you're living in, where you'll be serving, that you check in, because they don't schedule your household goods. There's a window between what days your household goods can come in. So there it is contractual binding that by a certain day it has to come in, but it also gets based off the day you report. So if you come in, and I'll use myself as an example, we arrived June 24th to Juneau, Alaska. John, based on just the way the days played out, didn't report for 4 days. Well, then the household moving process, luckily, because it was so far, it was still in transit, so we didn't get affected. However, other people who arrived on the boat the same day we did and started that same day couldn't start the full process of getting their household goods to them and having the movers here, even though their stuff was in Juneau, because they hadn't reported until that day. So now it's finding the movers, it's getting it all contracted out. My boyfriend and I waited 3.5 weeks for our stuff to come, which included all of our kitchenware. So for 3.5 weeks, we had to eat out 3 meals a day because we didn't even have a microwave. And it was like, do we buy it? Because you also don't know. It's that planning, right? So we could get a call tomorrow that if it's Tuesday, on Friday, they're going to be delivering our household goods. And then Friday comes and you don't have it. And so it's those little stressors where, like you mentioned, eating out alleviates just stress. Okay, well, we know we could go out to eat. We looked at it ourselves as, yeah, okay, another day without our stuff. However, we'll get to lean into the community. We'll get to try new restaurants. We'll get to meet people because have to go out to eat. We don't have a choice to be home. But even those little things of understanding and knowing when restaurants will be open and that they're reliable on how many hours they are actually open for is so important to so many people.
Mhm.
So for you, what is the biggest thing you hope people could take away from building their plan out, or just understanding the importance of having a plan in place?
That they're actually ready, that it's not a false sense of security that I offer. If you have a cookie cutter one, yes, it is a false sense of security, because I've seen cookie cutter continuity plans and they're terrible. And I'm like, that's not actually a plan. There's nothing you can even train on that. But when you have a continuity plan, there's multiple levels of things. One, you're instantaneously more secure. So people are like, well, it's hard because it's conceptual. It's not like, here's a shiny box with a button you can press and all of a sudden it works. It is something like, when I make an analogy to the fire department. How often do you hear about the firefighters fighting a fire? Almost never, unless it's like a 5-alarm fire. But they're responding to calls every single day because it's business as usual. It's just little things they become like hiccups. It's business as usual. They can just take care of it and move on. Same thing with the people's lives. It's like, oh, we just put this little grease fire out, not a big deal. This is what business continuity offers business owners. The other thing is it offers them a way to know their business more intimately than they ever thought that they did. So a lot of times they'll think, oh, this is the most important thing to my business. It's like, is it though? Let's look at these other stuff. And it's like, oh, I didn't realize that was so important. And then also making them realize that there's a giant ecosystem that supports them. And that's where supply chain, for example, comes into effect, or how they are selecting their vendors. Because if they do everything with one vendor, for example, like worldwide, the CrowdStrike issue that caused a whole bunch of havoc like 3 weeks ago, with especially Delta Airlines, like they had the blue screen of death from Microsoft because everybody had an over reliance on one vendor. And when that one vendor fails, everybody's, up a creek without a paddle, and you just open up to whatever their whims are and how they've done things. So it's thinking about this stuff in advance, feeling secure, and knowing that you're also not just able to keep your business open, but you're keeping your employees employed and helping them pay for their necessities like rent and food for their families. It's not just about you. There's such a bigger impact to why you need to be continuous and how you should want to be continuous.
And I love that analogy because it is so true. It's not just about ourselves, it ends up being a domino effect. And when you rely on one thing as well, whether it is a service provider like the Dell and the airlines happen, you end up, if it fails, you don't have anywhere to go. And that affected not just the airlines and the passengers, but it affected the passengers who needed to return to work, being able to maybe get a paid day off, like now they can't do something else or they couldn't report to their job. And there was so many domino effects to that. And that was a great analogy to wrap up. Erika, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
So I think the easiest way is you go through my website, and it's a clearinghouse for a lot of things. I have a blog on my website, got a link to my book you can get on Amazon on my website. Every podcast I've been on is also linked off my website, and that's easc.com. And then you can send me an email at info@easc.com. And if you want to find me on LinkedIn, here's the thing. I actually make all my connections legitimate connections. So if you just send me a connection request with nothing else, I'm not going to respond to it. I never do. So I often want to actually have a conversation with you, at least an email back and forth. So if you want to get involved that way, you can as well.
I love it. Well, thank you, Erika, for all of your insight today. And a few of our key takeaways include look at some opportunities as some opportunities that did not occur the way you wanted them to occur as a loss, but preparing you for the next conversation, that next journey, that next pivot that you might need to have, as well as no doesn't provide any solution. So ask yourself, how can we turn this no into a yes, we can make it happen? What are those small steps? So Erika used that as an example, as her lawyer brain was going, okay, nope, we can't deliver this. Nope, you're not going to win in this solution. But ask yourself how, and she's the great example of saying, yes, okay, we could work around and make it happen this way instead, even though plan A was a no, we could get to the same end result using plan B, as well as understand the difference in terms. I think this is something that we all forget. We're used to our terminology, our best way of language, but that doesn't mean that when you're talking to someone else with a different background, different experiences, that those terms mean the same thing. So understand the person you're having a conversation with, the industry you're working in, and what those terms really mean so you can deliver your message the best way possible. As well as this fun fact that even I learned today was you retain 80% of what you experience 10 days later. So when we all experience things, that is why it sticks with us and we're able to build off that long term instead of reading something. So really think about the experiences you had, not just as a leader or a business owner, a manager, whatever it might be, but also as the person that reported to someone else. What were those experiences like? How might you have wanted to pivot them? What were the solutions you brought to the table in those areas as well to create that full picture, as well as your continu- continually the I knew I was going to mess up this word. So continuity, got it that time. Your continuity plan needs continuously be touched. And I think that's so important. When we think about planning, sometimes we think about the fact that, okay, we could check it off the list. We're done it. And if we ever need it, we could touch it. When in reality, when our circumstances change, environments change, needs change of people, that plan needs to adapt too. So always go back and visit it at least once a year. Make sure everything's up to date. You might need to restructure some things, but at least being able to build it out early on and then set aside the time once a year to revisit it and make sure it is in full alignment. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Erika Andresen. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.